Americans began to hire in the 1870s and 1880s domestic servants to accomplish cooking and cleaning and laundry. And so this is when you get the rise of the middle class in many ways. Uh, Middle class women begin to see a rise in education. As I said, about 1870s at 21 to 25%. By 1890, it's about 36%, and by 1920, it's about 50%. So with this is you have a whole bunch of women's schools that pop up, and this includes Mount Holyoke, which actually is established as a seminary in 1837, but by 1893 it's a women's college. You have Baptist College in 1861 in Poughkeepsie, New York. You have Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts in 1870, Smith College in 1871, Radcliffe College in 1871, which later became part of Harvard. You also have Bryn Mawr in 1885 and Bernard College in 1889. And so with these new colleges, and the reason why they're established is because women weren't accepted into male colleges, and if they were, it was very minor. The amount of women that were involved, usually one or two, and it was extreme cases. Women at these colleges ended up learning a lot. They learned about suffrage and birth control and social reforms and political reforms. They were taught to think, but at the same time, on top of that, they were also taught how to be proper wives. That was part of the coursework for any of the schools that started, was that they didn't want women to go too far. And so they were taught about domestic skills, how to do a home, how the proper dinner etiquette. They were supposed to be accompanied when they left the college by other men. They were supposed to, by non-single men also, or in groups of women. Women weren't allowed to show a lot of these, they weren't allowed to have a lot of independence even within the college itself. So it's very interesting. Increasing number of women in the middle class began to work. In 1870, about 13% of women worked out of home. By 1900, 20% of women worked in the workforce, and this is middle class. In lower classes, you have a lot more because of the need of survival, and so you have a lot more women working. And a lot with factories, a lot of women began to get to work not only in the textile industry, which was traditionally done by women within the first industrial revolution, but you also get them in other industries as well. Women start becoming social workers and secretaries and nurses and teachers. And this is really important. Prior to the Civil War, those positions were all done by men. During the Civil War and post Civil War is when you get the first female nurses and really the first female teachers, and this is because of a shortage of men. Office jobs from 1870 went to about 19,000 women. In 1900, about 503,000 women had secretarial jobs. The number of saleswomen in 1880s was about 7,500. By 1900, it's 142,000. So I mentioned teachers and nurses are starting to be more acceptable as women. And this was this understanding that part of the four virtues is of keeping a sanitary home and education, of particularly in religion. And so you get this understanding of healing and educating should be a woman's job. We tend to think about it now as a lot of these positions are exclusively women. But at that, except for teaching, which is more evened out about 50-50. But with nursing in particular, a lot of people get taken back by male nurses, and this wouldn't have been the case prior. It was very acceptable to have male nurses, and in fact, it was seen as foreign to have female nurses in general. So this period of this true virtuehood kind of gave this understanding of that every woman needed to look like the true woman, and because of this, you get what is known as the Gibson Girl, and this is known the Gibson Girl, and I'm going to post a picture on the site for you. The Gibson Girl is by Charles Dana Gibson, who did illustrations that were published in magazines and journals and newspapers in the 1890s all the way up until World War I. And the Gibson Girl has this idea of the true feminine physical attractiveness. Women needed to be pale. They were tall. They were slender and voluptuous. They had to have a perfect S-curve torso silhouette. So you often see them with their tushes hanging out and their chest forward to give this beautiful S. They had to be pale and porcelain. Their dresses and skirts had to be long, at least to the ankle, and collars had to be very tall, and they had corsets underneath, and they were supposed to be regal and demure and calm and witty and confident and self-assured. And that is the Gibson Girl paradox is this new, and they were considered new women if you were a Gibson Girl because you were showing a little bit of ankle. And this is kind of the symbol that was of the suffrage movement. If you've ever seen Katharine Hepburn movies, she kind of has that, you have this top knot, almost plait of hair that is very long and up, and this is really the understanding of the Gibson Girl. And she was seen as a radical modern woman. She showed her ankles. She would ride bicycles, and this understand often they were seen as being spunky and flirtatious. And this is the Gibson Girl becomes the suffrage movement's the image of the suffrage movement, and this happens during the Gilded Age. Now, I mentioned bicycles, and I'm going to quickly talk about bicycles. By 1890s, there was over 1 million bicycles sold, and bicycles were considered the preeminent transportation, and it was new and edgy, and many traditionalists were appalled by women riding bicycles. It was seen as unladylike, undignified, and uninhibited women. Women who rode bicycles were wooed to sin. It was seen that it was stole your virtue, literally stole your virtue. That riding bicycles would ruin your virginity in many ways. Women were unchaperoned as they rode bicycles, and this is kind of very scandalous that women would ride bicycles, but it became increasingly popular. And at one point, a college in Long Island passed a resolution that barred women teachers from riding bicycles into the school. And school boards throughout, there's even a New York Times article on this. The practice of teachers riding in school and they said it has a tendency to create immorality among the children of both sexes placed under such a teacher's charge. That's how extravagant it was. In Long Island School Board said that it is not a proper thing for ladies to ride their bicycles. They wear skirts, of course, but if we do not stop them now, they'll want to be in style with the New York women and wear bloomers. How would our schoolrooms look with lady teachers parading around, boys and girls wearing bloomers? Pants. They were talking about pants. They might just want to wear males' trousers too. I suppose it will come to that, and we have to just stop it with our teachers before it gets too far. It was understanding that if we allow women to do bicycles, they're going to do more increasing things. And it was considered immoral to ride bicycles, but eventually became commonplace. Bicycles were the image of freedom for women in many ways. Bicycling was even used in suffrage posters as this is the new freedom in which women could have, that you couldn't have transportation by yourself and it didn't require a man. In fact, when cars became popular, cars were seen as the new bicycle. It was the fear of men that women didn't have the head, or their biology would make it so they could not drive. And anytime this is propagated time and time again, when you ever hear someone say, oh, women drivers, that is still used today, and that this understanding that women, because of their biology, aren't good drivers. It's absurd. It doesn't have anything to do with biology. But it was worried that women, if they used cars when cars came about, that they were neglecting their family, that they were going too fast, that they were too much in the public sphere, they were too much out there. Women would neglect their duties, they would cause immorality amongst their children, they would destroy their bodies, and they had too much of a feebleness of mind and character. Women should avoid driving because they would also become dirty. That was another big thing, because early cars were not closed in, so women would be dirty, and that was terrible. And in 1909, a lawmaker in Cincinnati, Ohio, debated banning women from driving cars altogether. The mayor declared the only proper machine for a woman could run was a sewing machine. And still, there were permits against women drivers. Women were often not allowed to get driver's license, and it perpetuates. Even into the 1920s, you still have this idea that women cannot drive. And again, anytime someone says, oh, a woman driver, is very insulting in the fact that this harkens all the way back. Another way women gained freedom at this time is cigarettes. I'm not condoning smoking. I'm just telling you what cigarettes did at this time. Cigarettes became a popular alternative to cigars, pipes, and chewing tobacco in the late 19th century. And the enjoyment of tobacco was seen as an exclusively male privilege. There's accounts of women who smoked cigars or did chewing tobacco in the West, and they were seen as the ultimate of unladylike, so far as going that they were no longer women and more men. By the 19th century, upper and middle class women began to smoke, and one of the first examples of women smokers that were popularized was President Theodore Roosevelt's daughter Alice, who was considered the kind of role model, the epitome of the new woman, because she smoked. She swore. She would drive and whatnot. And at one point, a high-ranking dignitary once told Roosevelt that he needed to get control of Alice. And Roosevelt responded, "I can be president of the United States, or I can attend to Alice. I cannot possibly do both." And he's really famous for saying this, because not only did the first daughter smoke, drive cars. She carried snakes into parties. She had huge playing debts of poker. She was frivolous at buying clothes, and she chewed gum, all of which were seen as the utmost unladylike. And smoking at this time became fashionable and glamorous, and after World War I, which had the automatization of cigarettes to give to the troops, it became further glamorized in film. It was seen as a intrusion into the male-dominated field. In fact, the New York Times also wrote that the practice of cigarette smoking among ladies seems to be generally regarded as the unusual accompaniment or prelude to immorality. Again, this is new technology having this understanding that immorality was going to follow. I would also like to add, with not only with cars and cigarettes and whatnot, but with the idea of cars and women drivers, subsequently, when the advent of aviation happens and you get the first women pilots, there is this fear that women cannot fly planes. And there's a new book out called Fly Girls by Keith O'Brien. And he, yes, it's the guy who's writing about this. He's talking about the first 5 women of aviation, and he says he gets so frustrated by continually reading, like, there is a plane crash of one of the famous female pilots that ends up happening, and what happens is the plane, one of the wings of the plane literally falls off the plane, and she dies, and people witness this wing fall off. And the autopsy comes back and says that she's on her period, and so they blame the crash on the woman's period, regardless of the fact that the wing fell off of the plane. Male pilots in early aviation who died were considered heroes. They would have parades and statues, and they were considered the ultimate courage for American innovation. Where women had crashes and stuff, it was down to their biology, and a perfect example why women shouldn't fly. And this is the same with driving. If there was crashes, women were seen as, this is perfect examples, kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And this is the kind of life of women at this time.